So the picture actually is from Polarity Therapy, and the man is showing the chakras. Now, people say, where are the chakras in the body? Where they aren't. The chakras basically we're vibrational beings, and the chakras are just frequencies of vibration. Dr. Stone call them the nature's geometric keyboard. And the chakras are behaviors. They're vibrations that create behaviors in our life, and we recognize them. We can't see a chakra any more than we see the wind moving a tree. But you can look at a tree and you can see wind blowing it, and you can tell the difference between a softer wind, a east wind, a west wind, a hurricane wind by the movement of the tree. So it's through our behaviors that we can begin to have a language of the chakras themselves, right? So we could say that uh, and we'll see that the chakras are continual change. And I put up part of my background was at one point a Jungian psychoanalyst, and the I like to put up alchemy pictures sometimes. So this one's with Jesus, and we see Jesus, and he has the elements. There's fire, there's air, there's water, and there's earth, and the halo around his head is ether. But at his feet, Jesus is constantly having to balance the chakras, the elements. In other words, there's no stopping. He's always having to balance these elements. And I think that's the same with all of us. We live in a vibrational universe. We're constantly exposed to different currents of vibration. In the ancient language, they call these currents shabda, which means currents of sound or the sacred sound currents. And therefore, in our daily life, in our mundane life, right, and that which we think is important or not important, social, not social, what does it not matter? Because whatever it is, we're having to constantly change in order to be in resonance with that which is going on around us. We're, so basically, the five elements are a language of change. And change, as we'll see, is the basis of stress science. Oops. And we go to polarity therapy again because this is a Dr. Stone pictures. On the left, this is a picture of a person as an energy person. And the arrows, you notice there's five arrows that are in currents coming off of the central core of the body. The central core of the body we know is the sign of the caduceus, which healers use. And the sign of the caduceus, in this particular case, it's meant to be wave, pulse, and form. You picture the caduceus, if you could see it moving, it'd be going like this, like a wave vibrating, a pulsation. It's pulsing, it's got wave, and it produces a geometric pattern. So if we look at this at ourselves as energy beings, the five arrows represent the five elements: ether, air, fire, water, earth, which are constantly streaming through us in different patterns that we have to constantly adapt and change into. We could say we have sometimes we're more fiery, sometimes more earthy. It's a combination of water and fire, whatever it may be, that we need to have in order to come into resonance with what's around us, with the vibrational field that's around us. Now, of course, those elements we would say from a Jungian standpoint are archetypal, right? Meaning that they're fundamental to life, and yet the stories that we have to go with them are individual. So if you watch my video, you can see if someone needs more fire, or they're not expressing fire, or they're not expressing water, that comes in the context of a life story, right? Or it comes in the context of a somatic life story in terms of something going on in your body, or usually that translates also into a stressor in your life that you're failing to adapt to. Therefore, it's causing a dissonance in this vibrational field, which it's what steps down to form a dissonance in your somatic body, a disease, meaning dis-ease, without ease with something. And if what we called last week human tuning is really tuning that Caduceus current at the core, right? So we're in tune. If the five elements are nature's geometric keyboard, that keyboard needs to be tuned so we can play the music of life. And so when we're in tune, it makes the geometric pattern mathematically, which is it forms a five-pointed star, and a perfect balance of the elements. In other words, if you saw the pictures of Jesus now on the balancing board, when those elements are in balance, right, we would come into this five-star pattern. In other words, I showed it last week, meaning that if they're out of balance, you would see it in your body as your shoulders are way high, you're twisted, you're turned. It's what a chiropractor may look for, or an osteopath who does structural medicine, or a massage person. If you're doing massage, you look for that naturally. If somebody comes in with their shoulders like this, you say you just know they're going to be better off if they walk out like this. They're more relaxed, which say they're also more in tune. And when that happens, the tuning wave, as you see on the right with the picture, that's the same as a caduceus almost. The tuning wave is set up and it moves through the joints because the joints now have space in them and they're free to conduct the wave. And when you're in balance, the green in the middle in terms of chakras is called the Anahata chakra. It's the heart chakra. It's that place of the soundless sound. It's now at the balance point, and this would be the balance point between your head and your gut, which is your heart. And now, when you're in balance, there's this silence. There's a long still point that emerges from your heart. That'd be anahata. That'd be ideal. And of course, in the 60s and the 70s, when the gurus first came, we thought, oh, that's a state that we could have forever. Uh, and we didn't realize that, in my view, that when we tune ourselves, like I said last week, we're ingraining tuning into our ability. We're ingraining, we're nourishing a state of tuning, a state of Om. And so the idea that we're going to have this and not go out of balance, to me, is a little crazy. We're always going to be going out of balance. And we're always going to have to self regulate to come back into balance. Ideally, we would do it ourselves, but we have practices like yoga, we have practices like meditation. Tuning forks is not a yoga. All these different therapies that we have now so much good research on, they're really just ingraining in ourselves a sense of being in tune because it's guaranteed. There's no way you're going to live life without going out of tune and having to find your way back in tune. Right? So, in order to find your way back in tune, well, actually, I just want to, with the five star, in terms of science, now let's say that you are out of tune, right? You're confused, you're looking, you're searching, right? So you're making up all these possibilities. But it turns out that higher dimensional patterns can form only when neural networks are sparsely connected. That means that all the stuff in your life that you get mixed up about, that's a higher dimensional pattern. If I do this, I get that, if I get that, but this gets that, and so on. The only way through such a pattern, such a complex pattern, is basically to lose connections, to lose neural connections. In other words, having a lower chance of making connections is better, not worse. And this is radical thinking in neuroscience. In this model, a five-star geometric pattern is the key to all higher dimensional structures, which really is science saying that if you have a lot of confusion in your life, that things aren't going right for you, that you can't figure things out, instead of trying to force the issue, stop and meditate. Do your yoga. Uh, that's why we have a consistent yoga practice. It's not to save us from changes in our life, it's to make ourselves the ability to go and self regulate to be in tune so we can then switch gears. And we want to think of the chakras as gears, as gears that we switch, like in a car. And that meditation ingrains in us neutral. So, in order to shift from fire to air to water, or from first gear to second gear to third gear, we need neutral. So, therefore, we go to neutral and we can shift. Without neutral, we're stuck. Right? So the idea scientifically that we form less neutrals, a less complex structure. But neutral, I like to say, in your car is boring. If you got in your car and you started the engine and you say, I want to go to the beach, and it's in neutral, and you could say, that's in tune, you'll never get to the beach. But if you want to get to the beach, you got to put your car into a gear and it's got to move. And once it starts moving, you got to deal with traffic. You got to deal with traffic signals. You got to deal with people walking across the street. You got to deal with people in the back seat, whatever it may be. So the moment you're in motion, the chakras are constantly having to deal with energy changes and relate those back to your tuning. If you go out of tune and can't get back in, you'll get bad feedback, right? So you get disassociated feedback. This would be alchemy again, and this is just showing you how the ancients, basically, this is Western alchemical medicine, but also it's the same as Ayurvedic medicine. We see that there's this dove, and the dove represents our soul, so to speak, and it's in a bottle, and it's crashing into the elements. In other words, it's going down into the elements, and these elements are in a particular pattern. That would be a life situation. The dove is entering into a life situation, and it's going, holy, oh my God. If you look at the dove's face, it's like, I can't believe this. This could be a crisis, maybe. It's, I can't believe it. This is coming my way. But then the dove has to figure it out. And when it figures it out, as it leaves, you can see there's a completely different pattern of the elements. So the dove now can ascend back to heaven. So the dove descends and ascends constantly. And the first pattern would be distress. The second pattern, as we see in science, would be called euphoric stress. And I think everybody's life's the same. This is just showing in alchemy that this they thought about this in depth, that these patterns were you needed to, in order to when you went into the elements, you needed to separate them out, you need to understand them, you need to put them into a new arrangement and put them back together again, and then you would ascend and then come back down into a new pattern. So there's this constant shifting ability to shift in the different patterns of elements in order to live correctly. And this is just fire, because we sometimes think of the chakras, as I showed them, that a chakra, the earth chakras at the spine, the fire, heart chakras here, the water chakra, and so on, they're in the perfect order. But you can look at the notes on a piano and you can say, well, they're in a perfect order. But when you hear them playing, it's different. You can imagine what order they're in. So so structurally, the chakras are vibrational. They can be they can switch around any way you want. So in this particular picture, this is from this is the a chakra arrangement called the secret of the golden flower. And what happens is that the fire chakra is now reversed and put underneath the water chakra in order to so the fire has to rise and the water then begins to heat up and it makes tumo or what's called steam, and its steam of course will rise to heaven. But then you have to think, well, how could the fire chakra reverse and go underneath the water chakra? But they're vibrational, so therefore they're not bound by normal physicality. So it's possible to move them around, put them in different places to get different combinations. And that's just, I said the chakras are stress. Let's do a little modern stress science. Uh, Everybody says, by the way, if you are in this class and if you don't have stress in your life, you really got a problem, right? I mean, you got a big problem. It's like when I worked at the hospital. It's very, and I used to be in the ER, the psychiatric ER, and people would come in, and if they said, uh, do you think I'm crazy?" And I knew immediately they were okay. And then someone would be acting crazy, and you could see they were not reality testing correctly. And I would say to them, "I think maybe you have a problem here." And they go, "Oh, not me. Everything's normal." Right? So I don't have any stress. So basically, if you think you don't have stress, if you think you ever have a life without stress, um, I would like you to rethink that. You could have stress every second, microsecond of your life. And you actually have, according to science, the ability to meet these stressors at light speeds. That would be enlightenment, as far as I'm concerned. But stress is any type of change that causes physical, emotional, or psychological strain. Any type of change. Now, if you have normal change, it's like you're driving your car down the road in highway hypnosis, you wouldn't you're meeting those stressors automatically and self-regulating with them. No big deal. So you may be stressed, but you don't notice it that way. But stress is your mind body response to anything that requires attention or action. Something we'll see that it creates stress creates what's called an alarm response. The alarm goes off, right? And when you fail to pay attention to the alarm, that will create distress. That's what most people call stress. It's without adaptation to the stressor. You are in dissonance with the vibration of the stressor, right? And that's what leads to a lot of problems physically and mentally, right? Over a period of time. Because first it could be acute, then it become chronic, it could be symptoms, and then it become a medical condition over time. But if you adapt to the stress, right? If you now the alarm goes off because the stressor is normal, it's an alarm, and you adapt to it very quickly, it becomes something that's called eustress or euphoric stress. Both distress and eustress have completely different physiologies in your body. But when you can adapt to something, it's eustress. Dr. Stone said in Polarity Therapy, obstacles are God's design to make man with a spine, right? And the spine is where the chakras are at. And Manly P. Hall, who was an alchemist, said that it's quite true that honey gained or extracted from coping with the problems of everyday life is the food of the higher man. I'd like to say, from a spiritual perspective, that the guru is everywhere, right? Any stressor in your life is ultimately the guru speaking. It's just a matter, do you want to listen with devotion and figure out what's going on? And if you look at science, the normal, what we call stress rating scale, it's all about change. Something happens in your life. Higher numbers, like someone death of a spouse or parent or divorce, they get high numbers. Uh, Pregnancy, even if you're pregnant, you see, be happy about having a child, but that's still a stressor. You'll see that vacation is a stressor. Any business, getting a mortgage, buying a house that you really want, buying a new car is a stressor. All of these things, changing from one school to another. You want to move to a new house. I remember I was in New York years ago and I moved across the street. It was the greatest stress I had in my life because I thought it would be the same as I could have moved 1,000 miles away. It didn't make any difference, but in my mind, I thought across the street would be easier. And it made it harder by thinking that way. We see vacations or stressors. Somebody walks, you know what's a big stressor? If you win the lottery. I testified in New York State about lottery winners. Most of them are going to be addicts and suicidal in a few years after they win because they can't deal with the change. Even traffic tickets. All of these things go in to make stress. All these, anything that you call change. And of course, in science, we add up the points and we know somebody needs help if they're 150, they get over 300 points or more. That's for sure, right? And so you need to have a way to get back in tune, to self-regulate. And we look at when you have distress, that just leads to all these diseases. First, you get symptoms, then you get diseases. That's because you did not pay attention to the alarm of the stressor. And what the stressor is telling you to be more fiery, more watery, more earthy, more airy, and so on. That would be the ancient language of what you need to be. And this is what I told you before that um, one of the goals of modern biology is to understand how a system's form influence its function, and human brain neural networks manifest structure and function relationships. And converging research suggests that when neurons fire in coherent spatial temporal patterns, we are capable of transitioning. By the way, coherent spatial temporal patterns are you're in tune. You're now getting accurate feedback from your resonant feedback from your vibration, from your story, from the vibration that has given rise to your story. I could explain that many different ways. You're lost in your auditory visual cortex, but basically, uh, you're telling yourself a story, you're looping in the story, but you need to get back to the resonant frequency without identification, right? In other words, when you become coherent, we become in tune. When we're in tune, we are capable of transitioning from one spatial temporal pattern, one stressor, to another stressor at light speeds. At light speeds, that's how quickly you can deal with a problem at light speed. Right? That's what we have available to us, light speed. And we go back to alchemy. This is basically we have a picture of Jesus on the cross again, and we had the Leviathan. Now, I would say that it's a pretty good view of stress here because I would say that Jesus is under stress right now. I mean, he's hanging on a cross, and a big fish is going to eat him, right? So I would call that a stress. And he has the opportunity of having distress or euphoric stress. And I think it's the same thing in the Bhagavad Gita because we have Arjuna and Krishna, and they're on a battlefield. And if you think that Arjuna is not under a lot of stress on the battlefield, and the Lord Krishna is speaking to him about how to deal with it, right? How do we deal with these all the upcoming battles and use your talents to use them correctly? But when the elements are balanced, he can either get eaten by the Leviathan, that's distress, or if he balances the elements, he rises up. That's called euphoric stress. That's called ascension in ancient language. Just to be the higher states of consciousness that one moves through to ascend. And I put this more in a fun way. We have a universal energy field, and there's constantly seeds of change that are cast, and those seeds of change actually vibrate a bone right here called your sphenoid bone. That's where your third eye is at, right? And then it creates distress. And distress begins as an alarm response. So we have an alarm, and if we don't listen to that alarm, we go to chronic stress. If we listen to the alarm, we evaluate what needs to be done. We get feedback. We change, right? We change now the 5 star isn't a static pattern. It's like an athlete moving, right? We now change into a new pattern to meet that stressor. We come into a new state of balance and we ascend, right? We ascend through a state of a vortex of stillness through the 7 levels that you saw. I call those the 7 levels of the still point. And we come back to the universal energy field only to have to do it all over again, again and again and again until we can do it at light speed.